Okay, so I'm at Goldfield's Ghost Town, and I got contacted by a treasure hunter named Walt, and he had a story to tell me, and it's about a giant, which, man, really got my attention. So with that, Walt, tell the story you just told me.
All right. In 1979, just before I was entered college, I was in the library at the college, and I was looking for a calculus book that I needed. And strangest thing, I was looking for the book, and in the section of the math books, there was a book by Chandler called 100 Tons of Gold. So I said, well, you know what, this looks interesting. So I started to read the first chapter, and I forgot all about the calculus book.
So wait a minute, I gotta stop you.
Yeah.
Did you know anything about New Mexico, the Victoria Peak, and any of this stuff at that time?
I had zero knowledge of Victoria Peak, Doc Noss, Orange Swearinger, the Caballo Mountains. I had no idea.
Well, did you know anything about treasure hunting? Was you into treasure hunting or anything?
Yeah, I was into treasure hunting since I was probably a junior in high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sorry for derailing you.
No problem. Anyway, I read the book, and I guess at that point I was bit by the gold bug. I don't know what else to term it. I thought, well, you know what? Before school actually starts, I'm going to take a trip out there to the Caballo Mountains. So I did that. I was in a particular pass in the Caballos. I ended up there because I thought it would be a good place to start, according to all the information that I read within the book. So that was as good a place to start as any. So I entered this canyon, and I was walking along, and I was going around a corner in the canyon, and I met directly up with an old Apache medicine man. He had the teeth around his necks, and he had a pouch here, and basically we started talking and so forth like that, and I invited him into Truth or Consequences for lunch. We went and had lunch, and we were just generally talking about a lot of different things, and it got down to the point where he asked me what I was doing out here, and I said, well, I read the book 100 Tons of Gold, and I thought maybe I would just come out and try my luck. I'm an inquisitive type of person, love adventure.
So from that book, did you get some ideas of where to go look, or you just picked an area and started looking?
Well, I think I gleaned from the book an area that I wanted to focus on at that particular time, and a lot of it dealt with Willie Doffett and the areas that he was at, which I think I found his old campfires. It was back up into the rocks. I didn't tell you this before, but it was back up into the rocks, and you could see where the soot from the fire had been there, and you couldn't see the fire from any direction except from the east, and it was sheltered.
So man, I'm really derailing you.
No, it's okay.
Remember where I'm derailed you from. So for those that don't know who Willie Doffett is, tell that real quick, that story.
Yeah, real quick. Willie Doffett was rumored to find a big stash of gold bars in the Caballo Mountains. He eventually lived in San Diego until the end of his life, but he periodically went back to the Caballos to bring out more gold bars. And he left a lot of clues as to where his entrances was. So I started focusing on that and concentrating on that, and that led me to finding a really small shoe. It looked like it was about a size 6. It was a man's shoe, it was a man's boot. And doing a little research, I found out that Willie Doffett had extremely small feet. So I thought, well, this could very well be one of his boots. I couldn't find the other one, but I just found the one boot. So I started looking around the area there, and apart from his campground, there was a bunch of the camping area. There was a bunch of cans laying around and so forth like that. And he spent quite a bit of time up there, it looks like, because he had a shelter built back under an overhang. So really it dead ended there for me. I just was happy that I found things like that actually I could verify in the book.
Yeah.
Somewhat. So that led me to believe that there's got to be truth to the story, which led me to looking in other places. I ended up at that specific gap that I alluded to previously. When the India and I were discussing, the Apache were discussing the area and terrain around the Caballo Mountains, he said there's a lot of history. And then basically I told him what I had heard about the Willie Doffett thing, and we started generally talking about other areas in this particular pass. He told me about a small opening in this particular pass that you had to crawl through. Once you crawled through about 5 or 6 feet, then it opened up into a big room. In this big room, he could hear the water. He heard water coming from underground. So he proceeded a little bit further, and there were hand-carved steps going down into the mountain. And the steps were heavily worn, like many, many, many trips of feet had been going across these steps. And it went down in about 100 feet, he said, and he come to a waterfall. And he said the water feeding the waterfall was about 4 feet wide. On the other side of the waterfall, he said there was a large carving 15 feet high or so. So he managed to get over there, and he walked through the room, and it entered into a smaller cavern, and it was narrow. He had to more or less slide through that narrow opening, and it came to another big room. And he started shining his flashlight around, and if I recall correctly, it was about 50 feet to each side of the cavern and about 100 feet high. And there was a few stalactites and stalagmites in there. He walked further in, and he was shining his light over against one of the walls, and along the wall, he said 25 or 30 foot, there was nothing but Spanish armor and Spanish weapons in an old, in a row, in an old, I guess you would say, casing. He thought that was real interesting. And then he shone his light over into a smaller corner of the room, and this is where it gets somewhat unbelievable. He said there was a table 6 or 7 feet tall, a chair about 5 feet tall from where you're sitting, and on that chair was a giant red-headed male that, if I recall right, he said that his head was slouched down on the table, and his head was resting on the table, and there was an old parchment there. On this old parchment, there were drawings of other caves in the Caballos, and in particular, he noticed that there was one cave that went from the Caballos all the way over to the San Andres, and he thought that was pretty strange. But then knowing about the Doc Noss store in Orange Swearingen, et cetera, he put 2 and 2 together. He said that the appearance of the giant with the red hair, it was receding, and only the back half of his hair was on his scalp. He poked the giant in he still had the skin. It was like he was mummified, petrified. He poked the skin, it was like leather. And his conclusion was that because he was so deep in the bowels of the mountain, that the atmosphere around there mummified the giant.
Did he say anything like was he dressed any certain way or anything? Did he say anything about?
The only thing that I remember him saying about he had no shoes on, nothing on there. His pants were up to about his knees, and he had this shirt on that had, and he told me it looked like rubies on his shirt right down through the button line, which You know, I have a hard time imagining that a giant would be dressed in such a way, but hey, that's beyond my knowledge.
Any weapons, swords, or anything from the giants, or?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because on the table with the parchment, there was a solid gold sword handle. The blade had rusted out, and you can see where the blade actually was. But the solid gold sword handle had conquistador helmet pictures on it, carved in the solid gold. There was 2 green emeralds in the longest part of the sword handle, and 1 ruby in the top. He subsequently took that sword handle out, and I personally have seen that sword handle. I forgot to tell you that, Terry. I personally saw that out in Arizona. He had.
So was it a giant handle, or was this from a Spaniard?
No, it was just from a normal hand, a normal Spaniard.
It was from a Spaniard. Somebody put that on that table.
Absolutely, that's the only thing it could be. But I've seen the sword handle, and the person who found it actually took a Bowie knife and adapted it to the solid gold sword handle, and was carrying it on his side. And everywhere he went, people were just looking at that doggone thing like, where'd you get that?
So you was telling me that on the way in there, this Indian, he's seen some Spaniards or some armor or something like that?
There's a lot of armor inside the cavern.
Before you got to where the giant was.
There was some armor right inside the opening. There was the head dressing, and the breastplate was inside on one side of just before the waterfall, he said. It was just sitting there. And that's when he went over the other side and went into the room full of armor. Now, there was, he did mention there was boxes of jewels, boxes of rubies. There was old priest robes in there. The priest robes, he said, were more or less tattered. It must have been from the atmosphere in there, the moisture. He said there was solid gold crosses, and some of the crosses had rubies and emeralds encrusted in them as well, in the points. So it sounds to me like it was a big storehouse for the Spaniards, and this was.
So if this was a storehouse for the Spaniards, you know, they would have done something with that giant or something. Do you think, or was this something that the Indians stored stuffs in there?
I just think if memory serves me correctly, this was a Spaniard warehouse. But he hypothesized that the giant was over these Spaniards, ruling over these Spaniards. And I think that's the way he put it. And was using it for slave labor. And
this giant wasn't really that old, like thousands of years old. We're talking, you know, and the Spaniards had documentation of seeing giants when they came to the Americas.
Yeah, yeah. I would say this is probably in the 1700s, roughly, 1700s. But something I just remembered, Terry, and that is the guy that was in the cavern said that when the giant's head was cocked on its side, and he said these were massive teeth that he had, and there was on one side of the jaw there was 2 rows of teeth, and on the other side of the jaw there was 1 row of teeth. Huh. So, you know, whether that's true or not, I don't know. Yeah. All I know is this guy was highly believable. So he told me about some stairs. He wouldn't show me where they were at. He told me about some stairs in this particular gap. And I did find the stairs, and they were carved out of solid rock going up the side of the mountain. Right at the end of the steps, on a knoll right beside me, there was one red heart rock, all by itself, because the Caballos, are limestone. The majority of it's limestone, but this heart was out of some type, and it looked like obsidian to me, but I'm not sure. But it was there all by itself, excuse me, and on the way up the steps, there was a round, probably 6-7 feet in diameter, rocks piled in a circle, and there was a rock at this angle with a pointer and another rock holding it up like this. And I looked up to see where it's pointing at, and here was a hand-carved opening in solid rock. I went up to it, and it was only in there, carved in about 2 feet or so, maybe 3 at the most. It had a shelf, and it looked like it was a shelf for some type of religious artifact, possibly a bust, something like that, because I'd heard that when the Spaniards went in, they would pray, and then come out, they would pray using this bust. I could be wrong on that. But the shelf was there, and I looked straight down, and there was a square shaft. It was a perfectly cut square shaft, about 3 feet deep. I jumped down into it, naturally looking for snakes with my flashlight. Jumped down into it, excuse me, and there were two lateral junctions going off in different directions, and that one was going east, one was going west. And these particular junctions, these laterals, again were carved out of solid rock, perfect right angles on both laterals. And I could shine my light in there as far as I could go, but it just kept going. I shined my light on the other side, it just kept going. So I had no idea how deep it was, but I know the light was back there 30 or 40 feet, and I could not see the end of the tunnels. So whether that had anything to do with, getting down inside the cavern into where the Spanish armor was, I don't know. But I thought that was, it had an X carved above the opening too. And I have no idea what that meaning meant, but it was very strange finding that all by itself with the pointer pointing up to it in that solid red heart obsidian rock right there.
So you told me you'd come out and you ran into the Indian again.
Yeah, when I was coming down the stairs, I was making my way back to the east. As soon as I got to the bottom, the same Indian stepped out from behind a large rock, and he goes, "I see you found it." I said, "Yeah, I found it, but I have no idea where it goes." And he just shook his head. So I asked him, I said, "Would you show me where that small opening is that goes back in to the waterfall and the giant and so forth?" He said, "No." He said, "You're going to find it yourself." And he said, "Someday you will find it, but I'm not going to tell you where it is."
Did he say he just didn't want to divulge it? He was telling me because he was worried people was going to go get in.
Yeah, with everything you see about people destroying petroglyphs and stone monuments, treasure sites and whatnot. Yeah, he would not tell me because of the fear of someone getting in there and destroying it. And it would open up a whole new can of worms, he said, because it would change history.
So have you looked for this since then, or?
I have looked. In fact, last week I was in this particular pass looking for it, and I couldn't find it again. I don't know if it was because of they have tremors out there in the Caballos all the time, and that rock sloughs off and covers things up that you could find, a month earlier. So I didn't find it at the time, but I'm going back.
Okay. Well, with that, Walt, man, I appreciate you telling your story to us, and with that said, that's a wrap.
Thank you.